Warning, this video contains sexy spoilers from the prequel, New Spring, through to A Memory of Light, the final book of the Wheel of Time. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back, guys. So, I recently made a video where I talked about romance in the Wheel of Time. But in that video where I talked about various couples in the series, there was one thing that I just didn't get into. And that was sex. Now, the Wheel of Time is not as graphic sexually as some other books, but there is definitely sex in these books, and different expressions of sex and sexuality. And well, that's what I want to talk about today. Sex and sexuality in the Wheel of Time. And to start off, I want to talk about something that I really like and appreciate about the approach to sex and sexuality in these books. And that is the variety, the diversity of ways in which it's expressed. And in this, I'm not even talking about sexual orientation. I'm specifically talking about the diversity of ways in which straight sex and sexuality is seen. And I don't even mean how it's seen in individuals. It's the diversity of cultures that I appreciate, because to me, it's part of what makes the world seem bigger and wider and more realistic. We begin these books in the Two Rivers, which is a very traditionally conservative culture when it comes to sex. We hear at some point that couples caught, I don't know what the word they use, I can't remember, fornicating? That wasn't it, but whatever. Couples caught before marriage would have been pressured into marriage by the women's circle or Nynaeve or the village or whatever, because that sort of thing is unacceptable in the Two Rivers. And we see that Nynaeve, Egwene, and Perrin hold to their culture in this aspect. Nynaeve doesn't have sex until she marries Lan. Egwene, it's a little less clear, and I'm not sure if dream sex counts, but she appears to wait until she's married to the nonsense that is Gawain. And Perrin doesn't appear to get any action with Faile until after they are married. We then encounter the Aiel. And yes, the Aiel have polygamy. It's a system I am not particularly fond of, although Jordan does try to frame it as if it's in an egalitarian system. It's just from knowing human history and cultures, we know that polygamy as a social practice does not come out of cultures that are equal between the genders, but that's another topic altogether. The Aiel are more free sexually. People openly have partners before marriage, and it's not commented upon. And then there is my favorite moment of highlighting a difference in sexual morals. And not just between cultures within the world of the Wheel of Time, but between the cultures in these books and our world. We have Elaine, who is a monarch of a major country, and she is pregnant without having been married, and without anyone knowing for sure who the father is. And it's not a big deal. I've heard some comments that it should be a big deal, like having a child of unknown parentage in a hereditary monarchy, but in this case it honestly makes sense that it isn't a concern, because the monarchy is traced between the maternal line, and that's just never gonna be in question, so not knowing who the father is, like, it's irrelevant to the succession. And I just love that on the whole we don't hear of Elaine's pregnancy, which would be a scandal in our world today, with monarchies today that serve no real function. It would still be a scandal. But in this world where she is an actual monarch who does actual monarch things, it's just not an issue. The people of Andor do not concern themselves with who their queen chooses to sleep with and when she does it. It doesn't matter to them. And I find that just a really cool aspect of their culture. I just really enjoy the variety, and I enjoy the way the characters from these cultures interact with each other and bump into the social norms regarding sex when they're in a new place. And this applies beyond just the sex. They have different perspectives on modesty that come up all the time. And it rings so true to me. As someone who has lived in various places, perspectives on what is appropriate to wear can just vary so greatly. As an example, I live in South Korea right now, and it can be seen as salacious to show even a hint of cleavage. But on the other hand, wearing tiny skirts and shorts and just showing vast amounts of leg, completely fine. I worked with a teacher who regularly taught kindergarten in what I couldn't help but think of as a mini skirt. something that would have been completely inappropriate back home. It's a almost 100% opposite view of sexual modesty. And it can cause a lot of confusion and misunderstandings and uncomfortableness. And I enjoyed that this was part of the world building. And also that it doesn't just apply to women, although for men it doesn't really tend to affect, in the books anyway, the clothes that they wear on a daily basis. It more has to do with being nude. But this video isn't going to be all praise, I'm afraid. There are aspects to the way sex and sexuality are portrayed that I'm not a fan of. One of the features, especially of female sexuality, that bothers me is what, in my head, I just call imposed innocence. That the women must be as pure as possible within the bounds of the story for us to like them or for them to be with any of the men that we like. And it rubs me the wrong way. Like, why, for example, did it have to be noted that Aviendha, who was a maiden of the spear and in a sexually liberal culture, why did it have to be noted that she had not been with many men before Rand? Why is it important that we get that information? And Berylane, for goodness sake, she's this woman who uses her wiles to get what she wants. She uses her sexuality in her position of power. She is shown as sexually aggressive and knowing what she wants, but when she seduces Perrin, she tells him that she's only slept with 2 men before. Why is that something that needed to be known? Why is that something that needed to be a part of her character? Why is this innocence imposed on her? Like, because if she and Aviendha had more experience, would characters not have, like, would readers not have been able to like them as much? Not that I actually like Berylane at all, to be honest, but other people do. A lot of people do. We have this great sex-positive character in Matt, who he likes women, likes having sex, has loads of fun, and I just wish we could have seen some of that from a female character as well. Now, I know, even as I'm saying this, that someone is going to bring up Murillo and the Green Aja just in general, and I do not see this as a fair comparison, because while Matt happily goes about his business and it barely raises an eyebrow, what the Green Aja do with their warders it's talked about in whispers and rumors. It's seen as scandalous to anyone outside of their Aja. No one understands it. It is strange and unusual. It is never given the legitimacy within the narrative and from other characters of the polygamous relationships that we see between, like, one man and many women, or just of the, oh, that's cool, looks like they're having fun, that we see from people when they're watching Matt go about his business with women. And then, of course, there are the lesbians. And I'm going to use that word even though it obviously is never used in the books. It's just the easiest way to talk about this. Hi, editing me here, jumping in to say what I think should be a given, but this is the internet. You got to be explicit with these sorts of things. I 100% recognize that for the time that Robert Jordan was writing, the inclusion at all of alternative sexual orientations was progressive. But I don't think you're protected from criticism in the future because you wrote in the past. That's just not the way books and media work. I can look back on movies from the 60s that deal with race relations and see that they were progressive for their time, but that there are problems. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Very, very progressive movie for its time, but looking at it now, there are big problems with the way that it tried to address this issue, and there are valid criticisms. Both things can be true. It was progressive, and there are problems. Both of them are true. I also hope it goes without saying that this obviously did not ruin the books for me. I love these books. I've made an entire channel talking about Wheel of Time because I love Wheel of Time. I still have criticisms, and that is allowed. Back to the show. The way lesbians are portrayed in these books is, well, it's frustrating. In fact, it's so frustrating that 10 years ago, I actually wrote to Brandon Sanderson about it. I was in the middle of a reread, and I think I was deep into the Galina Tharava stuff, and I was annoyed, and I wanted to get this off my chest. So I just shot off an email to Brandon Sanderson, did not expect him to read it, I literally was just yelling into the void, except I wasn't yelling. I was very kind and polite in my email. But I just checked my email, and I still have the email that I sent to him there. So I'll read to you an excerpt of what I wrote. I don't know how many female readers these books have, but I suspect we are a minority, if only slightly. I, however, would fall into a smaller minority, in that I am a gay lady reader. I know it is not an absolute necessity to see my ilk represented in everything I read, but it is nice when it happens. I was pleasantly surprised when I first encountered gay ladies in the Wheel of Time, but as the series has gone on, I have been, well, disappointed, almost to the point of wishing we had never been included. Every gay lady in the book, or a lady we can infer is gay, is decidedly unpleasant, from Galena, who is evil, to Elida, who is just nasty. Even that couple who were found tied up under the bed, they were so deeply ashamed of their relationship that it made me cringe. So before I get into Brandon Sanderson's response, because yeah, he responded twice. He's awesome. But I do want to get into this a bit more. Explain my frustration with the way lesbians are portrayed in these books because, well, this one's a bit personal to me. The women we get to know who show a fairly exclusive attraction to other women are just, they're horrible. They are petty, mean, vindictive, downright evil on occasion. And while, as it was pointed out by Brandon Sanderson in his reply, their lesbianism isn't a basis of or an explanation for their unpleasantness. Like, the books are never saying, oh, these women are evil because they're lesbians. Part of what we dislike about them is tied up with the way Robert Jordan portrayed lesbians. To explain this, I'm actually going to back out a bit further. I've heard a few people, both in person and online conversations and on podcasts, say things like, oh, the Aes Sedai always came across to me as kind of gay, kind of lesbian. And when they go on to explain it, their reasoning basically boils down to A, they have no men around, and B, they have no use for men, or they hate men. Basically, the reason the Aes Sedai seem kind of gay has everything to do with men, and nothing to do with actually being attracted to women. And this, God, I have encountered this in my personal life just all the time. People assuming that the reason I'm a lesbian is because I hate men, or that I'm afraid of men, or that I must have gone to an all-girls school, which I never did, by the way, or something, that my lesbianism came into being because of men. And it's so frustrating to have even my love of women somehow be centered around men. It's ridiculous. And people do not do this to gay men. In fact, gay men are generally seen as being allies to women, close friends. They are not portrayed as having this unreasonable hatred or fear of women. But okay, well, back to the books. This weird and distorted perspective on what makes a lesbian is just, it's heightened in the Wheel of Time, especially among the Red Aja, who are known to hate men. And this is part of why we don't like them and why they are so unpleasant. And it's tied up with how their lesbianism is defined. And then we have the other expression of lady on lady lovin', pillow friends. I know this is a euphemism in the book, and it's fun. But when Rafe made his statement about how there would be pillow friends out the wazoo, I cringed. Because the term itself, it belittles the relationships that existed. It comes across as light, as less serious than the real relationships they'll have later. And we even see this in the narrative. Moiraine and Siuan are very much a couple in the prequel book. It is clear and it is explicit, but their relationship basically just dissolves when they are raised to full sisterhood. And neither of them seem to really care all that much. Siuan, at one point, after they've been raised, so, their relationship just naturally ended then, I guess, Siuan is having a dalliance with a guy. And when asked about it by Moiraine, Siuan is all, oh, when was the last time you kissed a man? It's been so long, right? Don't you miss it? She is saying this to her ex-girlfriend, a woman she was in a serious relationship with not that long before this, but both of them just sort of dismiss their time together as just a fun little side sex quest that they had on their way to like the real relationships that they can have now that they're out of the tower and men are readily available. This is even said explicitly in the books, where sisters who were pillow friends when they were novices and accepted are shocked when Galena, for example, hope to maintain the relationship after being raised, because as it's said in the books, like those lesbian relationships, that pillow friend relationship, that's immature. They're adults now. It's time to graduate on to heterosexuality, apparently. I hope the show doesn't have pillow friends out the wazoo. I hope it has actual lesbians in actual relationships that are given the same weight as the straight relationships in the books. But just to not leave you hanging, as I said, Brandon Sanderson replied to my email. And I'm not going to read his response because I don't know, it feels kind of weird to do that, but he did reply that he A, understood my desire for positive representation, but B, it was not his place to alter the way characters were developed based on the foundation that Robert Jordan had outlined. And to be clear, I would not have wanted him to. A sudden, nice and pleasant and reasonable Elida would have been a shock, to say the least. But he didn't make any promises. It was a full-on raffo, basically. But the way he worded some things, I had to say, I was in no way surprised when in the final book we finally got some gay male characters. I honestly, until rereading this email exchange for making my notes for this video, I fully misremembered this part of the email. I've been saying for ages that he told me that there were going to be gay male characters in the final books, but he didn't. I just inferred it, obviously correctly, from some of the wording that he used. But, okay, like I said, he wrote me twice. He wrote me the first email saying what I just said, and then a few days later, he wrote me again to mention Arella Shigo, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce her name, she's a member of Cha Fa'il, as a positive lesbian character. And he was right, I had completely forgotten about her. There's another one that we both completely forgot, and that is Seonet. She's an Aes Sedai who we are told does not see men as men. And I'm pretty sure we're supposed to infer from that she's a lesbian. They are both positive, or at least they're neutral to positive representation. But they are so minor that both me and Brandon Sanderson completely forgot about them. They barely register as characters at all. They have no POVs, they have no relationships that anyone is in any way invested in, and while I'm glad they're there, I really do hope for more from the show. So, from this thorny topic to an even thornier one, I feel I would be remiss in a video about this topic if I were to avoid this, as unpleasant as it is, and that is the topic of sexual assault in these books. Thankfully, to me, at least, these books are not graphic when it comes to assault, and while it is definitely something that happens in this world, it does mostly happen off-screen. But, okay, there are two situations with regard to sexual assault that get talked about the most. The first is with Margaux, and I think that most people are on the same page with this situation. Margaux is at first violated mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, all of the ways by Ravin through the use of compulsion. Then she is again violated by Eamon Valda. I talked about this a bit in my romances video, but I find her story so tragic. She does end the series on an upward trajectory, but her life has just been so thoroughly ruined by what happened to her. Not just the sexual assault, just everything that has happened to her. I cannot envision a way for her to be fully restored. I mean, obviously she can't be Queen of Andor again, but I don't see a way for her to regain even like a fraction of what she had. All of her friends, all of her place, all of her prestige, all of it. It's all been taken from her. But of course, this situation is not the controversial one. Most people agree that what happened to Margaux is awful and vile. But when it comes to what happened to Matt, there is a sharp divide. A divide between those who believe that Matt was assaulted and those who think that he was having fun with a sexually dominant woman. Now, just to put all my cards on the table, I very much land on the side of Matt was sexually assaulted. But to put even more of my cards on the table, I didn't always think this. the storyline always bothered me, but I'm really deeply ashamed of why it bothered me for, I don't know, the first dozen or so rereads. The mental contortions and gymnastics I did in my brain to avoid admitting what was happening to Matt, I honestly don't even fully understand what I was doing. I'm just really embarrassed by it. It used to bother me because I saw this whole plotline as between Matt and Tylan as an obvious attempt at a role reversal. Like, Matt gets to see what it's like to be a lady, the ladies he pursues. But of course, Tylan doesn't really care about consent. And so the reason it bothered me, it's so hard to explain, is not because of what was happening to Matt, but because of what this seemed to be saying about what was okay to do to women. I was not upset at what was being done to Matt. I was upset that the narrative seemed to be saying that if Matt did these same things to women, it would be okay. And I was very clear that it would not be okay to do that to a woman. It took me almost a decade of reading this section to finally go, wait a minute. It's not okay that this was done to Matt. It's not okay that this is done to anyone, regardless of gender. Full stop. It's not okay. I don't need to do the rest of these gymnastics in my head. This is assault. She literally is forcing him to have sex at knife point. And I know I'm not the only person who took this long to come to this realization. And while I have absolutely no way to know this, my personal belief or opinion on this is that the same thing happened to Robert Jordan. That he just didn't realize what he was writing until it was already out in the world, and then that is why Tylan was just killed off screen, just really abruptly. Now, recently, when I was on the Dusty Wheel, which, incidentally, is a great show. If you catch them live, it's a call-in show. It's super fun. They have amazing guests on there all the time. They've had Brandon Sanderson and Kate Redding and Michael Kramer. Amazing guests, me notwithstanding. But okay, when I was on it, we were talking about sex in the Wheel of Time, and a caller asked about sexual assault, particularly Matt's storyline, and how it should be portrayed in the show. I'll give you my honest answer first. Honestly, I do not think that the Matt Tylan storyline, nor the Margaux storyline, is necessary to the plotline of the show. I think they could both be left out without much impact, and given the amount of story the show has to cover, I just don't think they'll make it into the show. If one of them does, I suspect it will be the Margaux storyline, because that one has more ripple effects out of it. But I really do think you could lift both of them without doing damage to much more important, significant storylines. But if I move beyond what I think will happen to what I hope, or I guess more accurately, what I wish could happen, is that I wish they could both be included, and the contrast between them be very plain, so that we see that the difference between the way people react to Margaux's very obvious trauma and the way most people ignore Matt's. Although, again, I'm going to point out that everyone always says, oh, all the women just ignore Matt's trauma, and they forget that Nynaeve didn't. Nynaeve went to Tylan and tried to get her to back off, and Tylan just didn't care and laughed it off. But that's an aside. Just any chance I get to praise Nynaeve, I'm going to take it. But yeah, my wish is that they are both included and that they are explicitly contrasted, so that we, the audience, are forced to come face to face with the different ways we react to sexual trauma of women versus men. Now, those are the two situations that are talked about the most when it comes to sexual assault. But there's a third incident that is not talked about as much, and it is a moment in the books that I do not enjoy. And that is the first time that Min and Rand have sex. Min and Rand have just been through something traumatic. And while comforting each other, they finally give in to the sexual tension that has been building between them for ages. And they have sex. And then, for days, or is it weeks afterwards, Rand goes into seclusion because he thinks that he forced himself on her. And Min has to convince him that she was just as into the sex as he was. And I hate this plot point. I don't really know what to call it. It's not a major plot line. It's like a beat in their relationship, I guess. And I hate it. I hate it because of what it is saying about men and sex. that men are literally just so taken over by sexual desire that they are unable to stop during sex, even if they think that the woman is not into it. Or that they're unable to tell if a woman is into it, or to think of maybe asking, like using their words. I don't know, that when men are so turned on, they just can't be bothered to care if the woman is into it. They just have to finish the act and then deal with it later. I find this just complete bullshit. Rand literally seems to remember forcing himself on Min, which means that in the moment he must have thought he was forcing himself on her, and yet he was unable to stop? This is such a bullshit myth. I've heard this from people in real life, people who are otherwise reasonable, that men, like when they're so turned on, they have no control. And I have more respect for men than that. Men, like, you're not beasts. Men have brains and consciousness and self-control. And look, I know I don't have personal experience in this area, but most of my female friends are straight and have had sex with men, and we talk sometimes about sex, and I know that men are able to stop if a woman tells them to. I know that a man is able to stop if he thinks he's crossed a line. I know that men can ask. I know that men are able to tell when women are enjoying or not, and if they're not sure, that they can use their words. I know all of these things are possible. But this apparent lack of control on Rand's part is written as if it is proof of his level of passion, of his desire. Like, that's how much he wanted her, that he couldn't stop. And I don't buy it at all. Like, if he really loved her that much, then he would not have kept going when he thought that he was forcing himself on her. That isn't love. That's domination. That's control. Now, you're probably thinking then that this moment makes Rand irredeemable in my mind, but it doesn't. And you want to know why? It's because I literally pretend it didn't happen. I have a couple of moments that I do that with in these books. Maybe I'll do a video about that in the future. I don't know. I block it out. It doesn't fit with his character, in my opinion, and so when I'm rereading the books, I skip this section. It changes nothing, except it makes me able to root for him and Min to be happy together. So, yeah, you probably just thought this was going to be a fun, sexy sex talk. And instead I got really, like, philosophical and argumentative. Sorry. But yeah, these are my thoughts on the way sex and sexuality are portrayed in The Wheel of Time. How about you? I am sure that I have ruffled some feathers. But, well, these are just my opinions. Let me know yours. Leave me a comment below. And I'd love it if you could join my Discord. We have tons of fun conversations over there, so come join us. I will leave a link in the description below. And if you want to support me making content like this, you can check out my Patreon. I am super grateful to the patrons that I have now. Really, thank you guys so much. And as always, like, subscribe, and stick around for the art credits. Bye!